right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight as we kick off the RRP's Virtual Makeover Week Educational Opportunities and the Thoroughbred Aftercare Summit with a session on doing more and spending less. I'm Stephanie Church, Editor-in-Chief at the Horse Media Group, home of thehorse.com, the magazine The Horse, your guide to equine healthcare, and a variety of horse health-focused e-newsletters, live events, and the Ask the Horse Live podcast. We also publish Off Track Thoroughbred magazine for the Retired Racehorse Project. Thank you to Godolphin Lifetime Care for sponsoring tonight's event. Godolphin works with its regional partners to support Godolphin-owned thoroughbreds as they move on to life after racing. Learn more at godolphinlifetimecare.com. At the end of this session, we're going to be drawing names from the list of registered attendees, and we'll be giving door prizes, so please stay tuned to the end. So tonight we're discussing a topic that's always relevant to horse owners, but especially so in 2020 when the global COVID-19 pandemic has affected everything from barn business operations and competition calendars to interstate travel and employment status. We will look at innovative ways tonight to streamline our budgets, utilize federal and state incentives for facility improvements, and lower our herd management costs without compromising on horse care. As our experts tonight, we have with us Krista Lea and Dr. Jill Stowe, both of the University of Kentucky. Krista completed the Kentucky Equine Management internship working with mares and foals at Shawnee Farm, then worked for trainer Kenny McPeak as an exercise rider and barn foreman while finishing her undergrad in animal science at the University of Kentucky. Today, Krista coordinates the UK Pasture Evaluation Program and has since earned her master's degree in integrated plant and soil sciences. Her research and extension work focuses on horse pasture production and management. She and her husband own several quarter horses and they compete in barrel racing and reining. Welcome, Krista. Jill Stowe, PhD. She is an associate professor in agricultural economics at the University of Kentucky's College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. That is a mouthful. The majority of her research focuses on equine markets, but she also has interests in behavioral economics, game theory, industrial organization, and sports economics. She served as the director of UK Ag Equine Programs from 2013 to 2016. And prior to her time at UK, she was on the faculty at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. In her spare time, Dr. Stowe contributes to equine markets by training and competing her 2 horses in dressage and lower level eventing. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you. Good to talk to everyone tonight.
So first, some quick housekeeping. Krista and Jill are going to walk us through some concepts to get us thinking, and then we'll move into a Q&A time. As you have questions, please add them to the Q&A chat. You should see that at the bottom of your screen, I believe. And we'll start with Krista.
Great, thank you very much. If you could give me ability to share my screen. All right, so we're here today to talk about doing more and spending less. And as a pasture person, then that, for me at least, is going to be improving our pasture and hopefully reducing the cost of horse ownership by reducing the hay that we need to feed. So just a really quick recap of something we all know: horses are expensive, and that is something that is very cost prohibitive to a lot of people. And so my goal in talking to you today is really finding ways that we can reduce that overall cost. So I think the first thing to look at is just how we view pasture within our farm setting. So keep in mind that it's a natural source of high quality feed. Horses are able to select as they go through the pasture what they're going to eat, and that allows them to select the highest quality forages that are out there. So rather than having to eat whatever we give them in the form of hay, in pasture, they're able to be much more selective. We're not going to get into the environmental aspects today, but a healthy pasture is much more healthy for the environment, and also could potentially reduce the need for government regulations on horse farms across the country. And then finally, it's cheaper than hay. And that's something that Jill and I didn't initially share slides, and I think we both put that in our slides pretty throughout the presentation. So I think you'll find that really is the case. And so I want to start by looking at that. Excuse me. So first we'll look at just some of the things that you need in order to have a pasture. You're going to have to either buy or rent the land. You're going to have to seed it, fertilize, and do some weed control. You're probably going to need some fencing and water, and you need labor to turn the horse out every day, and then the same person to bring the horse back in the evening. So that's what's required for having a pasture. Now for hay costs, it's a little different. You still have to buy or rent the land. You have to seed, fertilize, and weed control. And you're going to need some big equipment. So a mower, a rake, a tedder, and a baler is usually what's going to be required for you. But labor is where things really get tricky. So you're going to have to bale it. You have to load it. You have to stack it in the barn. You have to feed it to the horses. You got to clean the stall, and then you got to throw it back out in the field. And that's a lot of labor. And so in this case, for pasture, the horse does a lot of that for us. So that you don't have to provide that labor. So if you're buying hay, just remember that you're paying somebody else to do all of this for you. So I think it shows that there's certainly a cost savings when we do pasture versus hay, and hopefully Jill can give us more about that information. The next thing I wanted to kind of talk about is that the value of pasture. So it's easy for us to say, well, we've got some land out there, and we know they eat some things, but let's talk about how much it really is, how much is really out there. So for kind of round numbers, an inch of grass across an acre of pasture is about 200 pounds of dry matter, which is equivalent to about 4 bales of hay if we're assuming they're 50-pound bales. So every inch is 4 bales of hay. And that may not seem like a big deal, but if we look at it across the entire pasture and how many inches there are, it adds up pretty quickly. So first of all, when we're looking at this, we don't want to consider anything under 3 inches because we don't want to overgraze. So we're going to skip the bottom 3 inches, and we're going to say inches 3 to 9, which is where we're wanting to graze at. That's about 6 inches of growth. So across a 1 acre pasture, that's 24 bales of hay. So every time you go out there and mow your pastures, think about how many bales of hay you're mowing down as you're mowing that pasture. So the ultimate goal when mowing pastures is that you're mostly mowing off the weeds and the seed heads, and you're leaving as much grass as you possibly can for those horses. So I wanted to put together a quick list of what I consider the pasture biggest losers. So the ways that I see people wasting money the most when it comes to pasture management and production. And the first one is skipping on fertilizer. So phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, lime, all of those are pretty inexpensive. They're quite easy to apply, and they have a tremendous bang for our buck, especially nitrogen. Pretty much all horse pastures should receive fall nitrogen, and that's going to help us prolong the grazing season by both extending our growth into the fall and then also helping us to green up earlier in the spring. And so that's going to reduce the number of days that you have to feed hay. So fall nitrogen is a great thing to do. It's so easy and relatively inexpensive. So if nothing else, try to do some fall nitrogen every year. You don't even need a soil test for nitrogen applications, but you do for the other things. The next thing is cutting corners when seeding. So to me, seeding is like a big investment, right? It's like buying a car or a house. You need to think about it. You need to do your research. You need to plan ahead. Seed costs are typically around 150 acres or more, depending on how high quality seed you buy. And that's just the cost of the seed, not the cost of everything else. So if you're going to be just overseeding a pasture to kind of thicken it up, I really think you need to be thinking about that a month ahead of time. So the beginning of August for us in Kentucky, because there's several steps that you want to follow up with before you actually put seed in the ground. If you're planning to do a complete reestablishment where you kill the pasture and start it over, you need to start planning that out at least 6 months out. So these are big investments. They're very much worthwhile and a great way to spend your money, but you want to make sure that you do it right and that you have a proper planning. So if you decide to go seed a pasture on a Tuesday, you should not be seeding it on a Wednesday. You really need to be planning it out ahead of time. And the last thing is this idea of doing what we've always done. So many times I get on horse farms and we found a problem and we're presenting solutions for it, and they say, well, that's just not how we do things here, that we can't do it that way. And the truth is that costs you a lot. I think one of the best ways that we can improve how we manage horses is by being more open to a lot of different things, whether it's new types of grasses that are out there or new ways of managing our horses. And, some farms, if they have a fescue issue on one side, they reluctantly will eventually switch their mares and yearlings and put the mares where there is less fescue issue. And that sounds like a really big deal, but it turns out to be a really great solution for them. So just keep in mind that just because the way you've always done it doesn't mean that's the way you still need to do it. And then I threw in a bonus biggest loser here for you, high hay feeding and storage losses. So we've seen research that you can lose up to 60% of your hay in the storage and feeding aspects before the horse actually gets the hay. So that's a huge loss. And I highly recommend that you do everything you can to prevent that. So for feeding, that's going to be a hay ring. That's the number one thing you can do, is some type of hay feeder to prevent those losses. So the last thing I wanted to give you guys was a few resources on improving pastures. And I have two of them. One is the Cooperative Extension Service. So that's run by the state. And it's connected to the land grant university. So in Kentucky, that would be UK. And then one of the programs that's available, at least in Kentucky and possibly in other states, is CAPE, which is the County Agricultural Improvement Program. And that is a cost share program that allows you to get reimbursements for improvements that you make. So things like fencing and waterers and hay storage buildings and those kinds of things. The other one is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's part of USDA, and they are federally run. And they have a similar program called the EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And that's another cost share program where you can get funds to support building fencing, improving water, those kinds of things, and seeding and fertilizing pastures. Both of these organizations will also provide information. So even if you don't qualify or don't need any financial support, they're great places to get information. A lot of people are really concerned about approaching NRCS because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble for doing something wrong. They are not the type of institution that enforces any types of rules. So they're not going to arrest you. They're not going to fine you, anything like that. They're just going to try and help you find the resources that you need. And having a good relationship with these guys year round means that when opportunities come up, you could potentially be one of the farms that gets that. So when I had a big grant last year or a couple years ago that we needed some farms to participate, I called them up and I said, hey, tell me a farm that I could spend $10,000 on. And they only had one or two each for me. But I called up those farms and who wouldn't want to get that phone call to say, hey, I'll spend $10,000 on your farm. So it's always good to have a good working relationship with both of these organizations. The last thing I want to point out, I know I put a picture of cows on here, even though it's a horse talk. The reason I put this here is that horsemen are traditionally not as good at managing pastures as our cattle producers are. And the reason is that there's a very clear connection between the amount of grass you grow, the amount of beef you grow, and the amount of money you make. So it's a very clear distinction, but we can learn a lot from our cattle producers. So don't be afraid to use resources that are designed for cattle, whether it's publications, webinars, or even live educational events. I have horse people that go through grazing school. It is 100% geared toward cattle, but they come out of it with a really great understanding of pasture management. The grass grows the same way regardless of what eats it. And so managing the grass is the same. The animals are a little different. Obviously, we don't have quite as many options with horses as we do cattle, but you can still learn an awful lot from cattle producers. So keep that in mind as well. So I know we're going to do questions later, but if you want to contact me at some point, you're welcome to. Here's my information. Our website has an equine only page, and it also has a publication page with over 200 publications for you. And then I've got a picture of my horse here, Texas, on her retirement party. So with that, I will turn it over to Jill Stowe, I believe.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Oh, Krista,
Yeah.
are you giving me?
I'm trying to.
Okay.
There it is. Thank you.
We're transferring powers. Okay.
All right, here's the screen that I want to share. And let me launch this. All right, so again, thanks for joining us here tonight. My position is in the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Kentucky. And so I like thinking about these things. And certainly COVID-19 has really given us a lot of opportunities to think about ways that we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So, I think moving forward, anything that I'm going to talk about as it pertains to making decisions for horse management, and how maybe we can spend less doing that, is to think about the 3 F's for equine welfare, sort of the 3 basic things that horses need to have a good life. Those things are freedom, friends, and forage. And those 3 F's are going to look different based on where you live. So here in central Kentucky, this picture is from one of the farms out here, and we are very fortunate to have lots of big pastures with nice green grass and places to turn horses out. And that doesn't exist everywhere in the United States. I grew up in New Mexico, and I don't think we had a blade of grass out there. But there are still ways to provide horses with these resources, and that's what they need for welfare. And so when we think about our horse management decisions, I'm going to use that as a guiding principle. You know, science has advanced so much, and there are so many wonderful things that we can do for our horses, but we maybe don't need to be doing all of them when we are cash strapped. So these are sort of the 3 guiding principles that I'll probably be referring to numerous times tonight. Another thing that I want to talk about is, you know, whether you own a horse on a farm, whether you board the horse, whether you're running an equine business, you're making decisions, both short run and long run, that can have big implications for your budget. And in order to make the best decisions, it's really important to keep good records. And I think in the equine industry, from what I have found and trying to gather data and so on, that is not maybe our biggest strength. We would rather be playing with our horses than keeping good records. But those records are really important when it comes down to making decisions that can help the direction of your personal farm, whether it's a place like mine where I just have 1 or 2, I have 2 horses in the backyard, and I only spend money on them, I don't bring any money in. Or if you're running a business, a for-profit business. So I think it's important to keep really good records. And the other thing to keep in mind is, you know, we find ourselves in the position sometimes where we are making tactical decisions versus strategic decisions. So short run and long run. And, you know, when COVID-19 hit, I think a lot of us found ourselves in the position where we were having to make quick decisions on maybe changes that we needed to make with our horse care, or the amount that we were going to show, or the amount that we could lessen. Strategic decisions are ones that we have to be in for the longer haul. And these are the things like what Krista was referring to with improving our pastures. And so again, when it comes down to it, you know, having good records will help us make both of those types of decisions. And I think I got those backwards, so I skipped through that real quick. Okay, so you know, feed is one of the biggest expenses in horse keeping, right? And the last couple of years, we have seen incredibly high hay prices here in the Southeast, and I'm sure that might be true across other parts of the country as well. And it became a lot more expensive to feed a horse. And so the ability to extend pasture life is really important for your budget. And so when we think about purchased feed, so buying hay, buying grain, that sort of thing, the types of renovations that Krista was referring to, grazing costs, those need to be compared to what it costs to feed a horse purchased hay. So when we're talking about pasture renovations, and we didn't really get time to talk about rotational grazing, but that's another great way to increase the utilization of your pastures. Those types of things can really reduce the cost of horse keeping. So whether you have horses in your backyard or you're running a farm, you know, the less hay you have to buy, the better off you're going to do. And so, you know, from an economist standpoint, I would say we need to meet the horse's nutrient needs, but we want to do it as inexpensively as possible. How can we do that? And so I just want to show you a couple tables here, which might help you start thinking about how to think about these decisions of, should I spend money to renovate my pasture? Is it going to pay off? So this table that I've shown here is the average cost per day on what it takes to feed a horse if you are buying hay. Okay, so across the top, we have the cost per bale, and I think that that range, that's pretty accurate for here in central Kentucky right now, somewhere between $6 and $12 a bale. And then Krista referred to the hay feeding loss, and that was actually just from storing it, not necessarily what we're losing on the ground. And so those estimates on my part look a little conservative, so the cost per day might be even higher. And assuming that you have a 1,200-pound horse that consumes 2.5% of their body weight per day. And so you can see that the daily cost, if you're feeding purchased hay, the low is $4 a day, and the high is up over $10. Okay, so anything that we can do to increase the number of days that our horses can graze and reduce the amount of hay that we need to feed them, you can see like the daily rate per horse that you're going to be saving. And so I've just sort of tried to summarize that with the low range and the high range on this next table. So if we look at the cost savings per horse to extending grazing days, you know, how long by renovating the pasture or by using rotational grazing, how many additional grazing days can we get? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? It's going to depend on a lot of factors. But you can see that those cost savings are between maybe $28 and then about 10 times that, right? Over close to $300. And that's on a per horse basis. So if we think about those pasture renovations, you know, hopefully they're going to last us for about 5 years or so. That's not something we're going to have to do every year. So I think this is a really good way to start thinking about the benefits of implementing some of those types of improvements. Yeah, so compare these cost savings to annualized per horse cost of implementing other pasture management strategies. So just to wrap up my introductory piece, you know, one of the things that I think we know, but it's good to think about this intentionally, is that equine markets are just by their very nature very volatile. So horses are considered luxury goods. In times when markets are good, demand for luxury goods is really strong. In times when markets are poor, demand declines quite a bit. And so we know that we're participating in a volatile industry, but in order to survive and hopefully even succeed in that type of a market, it's important to keep good records. We already talked about that. And then also to be very intentional about diversifying revenue streams. And I'm talking more to people who are operating businesses. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, right? When you're in a market that's this volatile, it's really important to diversify. And the other thing is to plan ahead. Again, I've got a typo there. That should say be strategic whenever possible, not tactical. We don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive as much as we can. So think about whether you have, you know, insurance for your horse or emergency savings accounts to help cover times when all of a sudden we have this big recession. You know, we know that we're supposed to have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings for our family. The same is true for our animals. And then having care plans as well. So one of the things I had never thought about prior to COVID was, well, if I get sick and can't take care of the horses, who's going to take care of them? And so that doesn't apply just to COVID, obviously. But it's brought up a lot of really good things to think about to help us manage our horses better in the future. So that's all I have for this intro piece, and I look forward to answering any questions I might be able to help with.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on over to some questions now. Let's see here. All right. So, okay, here's one for you, Krista. As we head into fall and winter, what are some budget conscious things I can do related to feeding?
Yeah, that's a great question. Hay rings, like I talked about, hay feeders make a huge difference. And I hate to admit that for a number of years, my husband and I kind of skimped on that as well. And the year we finally broke down and bought, for us, we were feeding round bales, so we bought a hay ring. It's about $300. And I think within about 3 days, we were amazed at how much hay it was saving, how much slower we were going through hay bales. And even though I preached this for a number of years, when I finally did it myself, it still just blew me away. So any type of feeder you can use to preserve some of that hay as you're feeding it, that's going to make a huge, huge difference. The other thing is to think about where you're planning to winter your horses at. So if you're lucky enough to have a dry lot or a high traffic area and somewhere that you can keep those horses, that would be great. But if not, establishing a sacrifice pasture. And so that's going to be a place that they can tear up even when it's really wet out. And hopefully prevent a lot of damage on your more perennial pastures. So I like to choose ones that are pretty flat, ones that are already in not the best shape that you're planning on renovating in the next couple of years. And then anything that's got some type of high traffic pad, rock or gravel, maybe some cover, that kind of thing too. So those would probably be the best things for you.
All right, thank you. So which hay ring did you end up getting?
We used the tombstone type that's made for horses, whereas like the cattle type has the bar on top and can rub manes out. And we got it at Tractor Supply, I think. So.
Okay, cool deal. We actually already have one question from the audience that I think you might be able to answer. And that is, where did it go? Oh, there it is. Sarah Joy would like to know where she can find some of those resources for North Texas that you were talking about with the
cost
grants and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So every state is going to have an extension service, and that would probably be your best place to start. So in Texas, Texas A&M, I believe, is the land grant university there. So just Google Cooperative Extension Service in Texas, and that'll get you started. I don't know if they're county-based or region-based in Texas, but that'll be a good place to start. And then also the NRCS website. They have a little map on there that you can click on your state and your region, and then it'll take you to your local office eventually. And I think just building a relationship with those two organizations, having them come out and look around and just getting to meet them, get on all of their email lists and that kind of thing. That's a great way to start because their deadlines tend to move around a lot. And sometimes they're not publicized the best. So it's good to just have a good relationship with both of those groups.
Okay, thank you. I remember we used to work a lot with extension back in my hometown in Virginia when we had a small farm. Okay, what's that?
It's a tremendous resource for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jill, so record keeping. Do you have any tips on record keeping? Is there a budgeting software that you like to use that can help us all when we really want to be out at the barn, but we need to be in a spreadsheet instead?
So, this doesn't have to be difficult. I think if you're running a business, then there are some softwares out there that you're going to have to pay for, but are going to help you manage the business better. But Excel spreadsheets has some really great blank templates that you can use for personal budgeting. And I think they would be very easily adaptable to equine, to all of your equine expenditures and revenues if any are coming in the door that way. But this is something, I like to budget and I found, but I don't want to spend money to do it because I like to budget. And so I found that Excel has some really great templates that you don't even have to build anything. You might need to change a couple of words there, but I think that's a great place to start.
Thank you. I'm actually a bit of a budget nerd myself. And if you like app-based, I use EveryDollar. And then I know some people who really like YNAB. You need a budget and you can like personalize those little headings and such, which is really nice. Let's see, what else do we have here? So I have a question here for Krista. So Tally from our live audience would like to know, do you drag small fields to spread manure or do you pick up the manure? Does it add nutrients back to the soil?
So manure is definitely going to add nutrients back to the soil. So as long as it's not a high traffic type situation where if it doesn't have a rock base, if it's just dirt and grass and weeds probably, then yes, certainly leave the manure. It is good to drag it to spread it out so that we don't get piles of nutrients and piles that don't have anything. So it's good to spread it. I prefer to do that mostly in the fall and winter, because in the summertime we tend to spread a lot of weeds around. So that's why I try not to do it. Although if you talk to parasitologists, they would tell you the exact opposite because of parasite control. So you kind of have to decide what your biggest issue is. But for a lot of us, there's some native warm season weeds that are out there, specifically nimblewill, and we believe that spreading that weed could be spread quite a bit by dragging pastures in the late summer, early fall. So.
Are things like nimblewill, is that what makes those roughs in the pasture where, you know, it seems like the horses never graze there, or?
It's one of them. So horses don't graze nimblewill. And it's problematic because it's very well adapted to the area and we don't have any herbicides that'll control it. Horses are very much spot grazers, and so they will pick one area over another area. And it may be because it's close to buddies. It could be that it's close to the barn or the shade or whatever, or for whatever reason they just start there, and then you end up with what's called roughs and lawns. So roughs is where the grass is really tall, and then lawns is where they're mowed down very much like a lawn. And that's where mowing close. That's kind of the one time I would say it's good to mow close when you're moving horses off of a pasture for a while to rest. Then mowing close to kind of even out all of those areas is really beneficial. So.
Okay, thank you. I keep forgetting to unmute myself. All right, let's see, Jill. Okay, actually, Krista or Jill, I'm gonna just let you guys decide who's gonna answer this one. We have a thoroughbred focused business in which we prepare horses for their second careers and also teach them riding lessons. We'd like to make some improvements to the pastures, fencing, and arena footing. Are there grants available for these types of upgrades? Okay, so we've answered that a little bit, but are there any more specifics that you'd like to provide for this particular situation?
I don't know that there's new programs that I know about, but it might be a good chance to explain a little bit more about how they work, because they are so popular. So first of all, arena footing, they're probably not going to touch that. So EQIP that's run through NRCS, their goal is to reduce the environmental impacts of horses. So anything that is going to be better for the environment is the things that they're interested in. So when they put up fencing, it's to subdivide pastures to make it easier to rotationally graze. Whereas CAPE, the local or the state level program, that one is really aimed towards improving the profitability of agriculture. So you might get away with arena footing with that one, but I kind of doubt it. Both of these programs are aimed primarily at livestock and vegetable and small grain production. So anything that's really specific to horses, they're going to struggle with a little bit. But in both cases, what they're looking to do is reimburse you for the cost of doing some of these things. So typically you have to do the improvement yourself up front, and then you get reimbursed for it after the fact. You are expected to maintain those improvements for a number of years, usually 5 to 20 years, depending on what feature it is. So pasture is 5 years, fencing is 20 years, I think waters are 10 years. So you do kind of have to keep that in mind. But they're both really great programs to look into. CAPE is not a national thing, so I'm not sure what counties or what states that it's available in, but there could also potentially be some other programs that I'm not aware of. So I think you have to do some research to find those. As far as NRCS, they have a history of not wanting to work with horse farms, and we are slowly but surely making inroads on that. So in Kentucky they do, and in Virginia they do. Other states I'm not sure, but you're welcome to point out, hey, I know they're doing this in Kentucky. I can give you this girl's email address. They'll shoot me an email, and we can at least try to get you some help that way. But just keep in mind that this is something new for them to be working with horse farms. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think that another resource that small business owners might want to investigate are through each state's small business development center. I think that those organizations are the ones that are positioned best to let small business owners know what sorts of grant resources might be available, or what kinds of special loans might be available for operations like that. So definitely check into the Small Business Development Center. They've got great resources on putting together financial plans to help maximize the odds of success.
That's a great addition. I just contacted ours for our new farm. And I thought we gave out a lot of publications. They sent me so many documents. I was amazed at how much information they sent me. So yeah, great resource.
All right, thank you. So I have a question here that is COVID related. Jill, my hours got cut back because of the effects of COVID-19 on the business. My biggest bill is my feed bill, and I'm trying to figure out if there's any way I can trim it. Help.
So I think that's, unfortunately, I think there's probably a lot of people in that situation right now. And this is where I want to go back to the principles of the 3 F's for equine welfare. We have so many wonderful feeds and supplements to help our horse in every single way possible, and maybe more. And I think when finances are tight, it's important to really sit back and think about which of these are absolutely critical to the health of my horse. I've got my horse on 1 or 2 things that it makes me feel better that he's on them. I don't know if there's a benefit or not. And so I think it would be really wise to give as objective look as possible at what your horse is currently eating and what he or she really needs. And when the job gets reinstated, then you can go back to full force. But those 3 F's, we don't want to skimp on forage. That's a really important, the most important part of a horse's diet after water, right? So let's keep that as the guiding principle and help get through this rough patch.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have another question, and this one's probably for Krista. I'm starting a new farm in the future, and the pasture has never been used. I have had a pasture specialist look at it. My question is, how do I start horses on it? This fall, there were a lot of tall flowers and grasses that I am now cutting down. I won't start using it until next summer or fall at the soonest.
That is a loaded question right there. There's so many different ways it could go. I'm really interested to hear what the pasture specialist said when they looked at it. Oftentimes, pastures that haven't been used for a long time are either really good or really bad. And it really depends on how they were cared for ahead of time. So if they were cared for pretty well and they got a few years off, they're usually in really good shape. And some mowing and a little fertilizing, and they're pretty good. If they were pretty heavily abused ahead of time, they tend to only get worse with neglect. And if that's the case, you might seriously consider that if you're not needing it until next year, a complete renovation may be in your best interest. That's something that you really can't make a determination on until you look at it. But I think the big thing is learning to identify some of those unknown species. So like tall flowers in the springtime or something, really depends on what those things are. I found an app recently that's really good at identifying weeds in a pasture. You take a picture and it gives you an identification, and it actually does pretty well for the most part. It's called Picture This. And it's quite handy. There's a free version and a paid version. And I think it's done really well. What I usually do with it is I do the picture, and then if I'm not convinced that that's the right one, then I'll Google it and look for some more pictures of that weed that it suggested and see if I actually think that that's what it is. And if I'm in the area that weed is going to be grown. So I think that'll give you a lot of information about just identifying some of those weeds, and then, talk to some neighbors and find out what they know about the area and the land and how productive it is and that kind of thing. But a county extension agent or an NRCS conservationist would be able to help a lot with that as well. Like I said, they're glad to come out and just bring information, even if we're not even talking about money right now, just bringing information.
Okay, thank you. So Jill, something that you said during your presentation, I was curious about. So did you think through the, how would my horses be cared for if I wasn't able to care for them for a little while, if I got sick, or how did you work through that? And did you put it in a spreadsheet?
I have not put it in a spreadsheet. So, you know, we have 2 horses at home, and I have a husband and 2 boys, and depending on what the weather is doing, the horses can live outside. So it is possible. And I do have feed charts in the barn, right? So everybody knows what they get. So if my family is okay, someone, like when I had foot surgery, you know, someone could take care of those things. If all of us were down, then I have a phone book with some of my close friends that live nearby and so on that could come over and sort of help get us through a rough patch. I don't know that that would work long term, but I think it would get us through a short illness.
All right, thank you. Yeah, one of our team members at the beginning of COVID wrote an article, okay, are my horses ready for me to be quarantined? And along with some other things we plan on sending out to the attendees tomorrow, I'll be sure to include that link so you can read it. Okay, what else? Let's see. We've had several questions about soil testing, actually. Do you recommend that? And how do you know if your pasture is providing that what your horse needs?
So it's 2 parts, and I'll get to both of them. So first of all, soil sampling. Yes, you should absolutely soil test a pasture. Typically, we say every 2 to 3 years is all that's needed for a pasture. If it's a hay field, it does need to be sampled every year because we're taking off a lot more nutrients when we take off that hay. Sometimes if a pasture needs a lot of amendments early on, then we'll go ahead and have you sample it again the next year just to make sure that we've gotten it right. You can soil sample any time of the year. Personally, I like fall best. I think that's when the ground is easiest to get into because if it's really wet, then it's really hard to do it because you pull the probe out and the mud just slides out of the probe. So I think about now is a really great time to do soil sampling. And you can get that I know in Kentucky, at least, our county agents can run those soil samples for you. And they're free or very cheap. I think in my county, it's $5 after the first 25 samples. So it's pretty inexpensive to do. What was the second question? I totally forgot. What was it?
And I forgot it because it was off the top of my head. How do you know if it's meeting the nutritional requirements that your horse has?
So the best way to know if it's meeting the nutritional requirements for your horses is your horse maintaining good body condition? Are they doing well? Are you seeing any signs of deficiencies? Those kinds of things. I've known people who have sampled some of their pasture and sent it off for a quality analysis for macro and micronutrients. Personally, I don't think that's really very effective. There's a lot of things that happen with that sample when it's a live plant by the time it gets to the lab. So you get a lot of changes. And then by the time you get the results back, the pasture has changed. And in addition to that, horses are able to pick and choose what they want. So what you sample is may or may not be what they're actually eating in the pasture. So I think that if they're maintaining good condition and they look healthy, then you're doing pretty good. If they're getting really skinny, probably not. And as far as micronutrients, I think that's where if you need to feed a feed, just making sure it's a well-balanced one. So I have quarter horses; they stay quite fat on air, and so we use just a pelleted. What am I looking for? Forget the word I'm trying to call it.
Ration balancer.
Ration balancer. Thank you, Dr. Stowe. Could not come up with a ration balancer. And that basically just contains all the micronutrients and the protein that you need, but there's no extra calories in it. So that's a good option. I know this is mostly for thoroughbreds, and you probably don't have that same issue like I do, but that's what we use. So
cool, thank you. Yes, this year I actually had my my feed company. A rep came out and sampled the hay, so I knew what was in our hay, and I could kind of see how my horse's body condition was doing. And then ultimately, I ended up switching to a balancer for a season, and he's done really well on it with a really high quality hay. It's been pretty cool to see that.
Mm-hmm. And hay sampling, totally different. You should always sample your hay. That's a great thing to do, and it's really easy to do too. So.
Okay, let's see what other questions we've had. come through. All right, sorry. Okay, so if you are planning on switching a grass plot over to pure alfalfa for hay, where do you start? Get rid of all the grasses that are currently there.
So we're talking about switching a pasture from grass to alfalfa hay production. I'm not an alfalfa expert, but certainly you'd have to get rid of the grass that's there first. And actually before that, you would actually want a soil sample. And so alfalfa is very sensitive to soil deficiencies. And so I would want to make sure that I had that stuff right before I proceeded on that process. Because if you don't, it can sometimes take a while to get the pH where you need it for alfalfa. Even before that, really, so I'm kind of working my way backwards now. But before that, I would look at a program called Web Soil Survey. It's a free online program. It's maintained by USDA, and it allows you to look up the soil types that are on your farm. Alfalfa is pretty sensitive to the soil types that it's grown on. And so I'd want to make sure that the area I'm planning on putting in alfalfa is one that's going to do well for that. So you can look up the productive capacity for alfalfa production on different soil types through that program. I'll warn you that website is really archaic and difficult to use. But if you look on our Forages website, we have a publication that goes through how to use it. It goes through looking at carrying capacity. So how much pasture do you need per horse based on your soil types? But you can modify that pretty easily for alfalfa production. So that would be a good way to go. I'd also look at, I'm assuming they're wanting to use the alfalfa for themselves. I would take a pretty hard look at how much it's going to cost you to do that. If you don't already own baling equipment, it's quite expensive, and putting up high quality alfalfa is pretty difficult. Not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying you really have to work hard at it. And so most horse farms in this area really don't have the expertise or the time to focus on doing alfalfa production, and that's where they are better off to buy it. So it depends on how much quality you need in your alfalfa, how much time and resources you have to devote to that. If you're a small operation, it's probably not beneficial. But if you're pretty large, it probably could be. So I think there's a lot of factors, and there's a big expense to that. So you want to make sure you do your homework before you start.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody who's out there, please send in your questions. We have about a little less than 15 minutes to answer them. So I'm eager to see some more from the live audience. Let's see. Here's another one, Jill. Budgeting is not my strong suit. It gives me anxiety, honestly. So I've never had a budget. Where's the best place to start? So we've talked about, platforms for budgeting. What does the horse owner need to include in their budget and need to remember to include?
Yeah, whether you're budgeting for your horse, your family, or your business, the premise is really simple. You want to think ahead of time about what your upcoming expenses are for the month, what your upcoming expected income is or cash inflows might be. And then first of all, you can just sort of look at that budgeting and make sure that your inflows are at least as big as your outflows, hopefully a little bit larger. And then you think about the places where you have the necessities and you have a little bit of wiggle room. So sometimes we have to trim a little bit here, a little bit there. And so once you have those projected amounts, then as the month goes on, you need to actually write down your actual expenditures that you are spending on concentrate that you're purchasing, hay, possibly, grooming supplies, lessons, farrier work, vet work, that sort of thing, just any way in which you might spend money. We always have unexpected things come up, and so it's good to leave some room in your budget for those unexpecteds. And if you don't spend it one month, you can save it and put it away in those emergency you know, emergency savings plan. So, you know, just as a starting point, I think that it's simple, but it's a really good way to start. And, you know, I think it's interesting after you do that for 2 or 3 months or a year, you can see, first of all, maybe where you spend more than you generally expect, where you might spend less. And you could also see the cyclical nature, right? So we expect a lot of high feed costs in the winter when we're feeding a lot of hay. In some places out west, I know that they feed hay year round. I grew up in New Mexico, and I never realized that you didn't have to feed a horse during the day, you know, once we moved to Kentucky. But you can see the cyclical nature of those expenses as well. And so I think both of those things can help you make decisions when you need to about where you need to cut.
Those are really good tips. Thank you. So we have another live question, and it is for Krista. I planted Kentucky bluegrass on a section of my land. I don't think it grew as fast as some of the other grasses when it came in. Is there anything I can do to help it along?
So Kentucky bluegrass has a much slower germination than our other grasses. So if you were to plant it with orchard grass and fescue, it wouldn't be surprising that it would be 2 or sometimes even 3 weeks behind that, just in the germination process, so just popping up out of the soil. Once it gets going, it's even slower to really spread and to thicken up. So if this is the first year that you've seeded it, and assuming we're somewhere in the central Kentucky area, I would give it another year and see before you really establish it, or you really deem it a failure, because oftentimes we see that we seed a lot of bluegrass in a pasture and we don't see it very well the first year, but the second year we do. As far as things you can do to encourage it along, that fall nitrogen is going to be a huge boost to it. So we recommend, 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen in the fall, and you can do that twice. So now is good, and then another 6 to 8 weeks later. So if you're buying that in the form of urea, that's going to be, you know, roughly 80 to 120 pounds of urea, and that's per acre. The other thing is giving it a rest. So horses really like new seedlings. So when they're just a couple inches tall, they're quite tasty. And they're going to go through there, and they'll, if you use the drill and you drilled it, they'll actually just go through and pull the seedlings right out of the ground, right down the drill row. So anytime you give that pasture some, Jill's laughing, but she knows this is true. Anytime you can give that pasture some rest and give those seedlings a chance to get established before they're grazed heavier, then that would be a big benefit as well. And then always pray for rain in the fall.
Krista, can I ask a follow-up question? So you had talked about fall nitrogen. Can you do that while the horses are out on pasture?
You can, absolutely. If you want to be safe, you could bring them in for a few days or move them to a different pasture, but nitrogen is what is in the air. And so there's really no harm in putting it out, as long as the person putting it out isn't, you know, playing on their phone or something and dumps a big pile out. Because if they went over and just took a big bite of it, that might be a problem. But as long as it's getting spread around pretty evenly, then you shouldn't have any issues. So that's why I say it's one of the easiest things, is that you don't even have to take the horses out. So.
Great, thank you. So there's a question about the cost associated with boarding versus keeping the horse at home. When someone's trying to decide which to do, let's say they're moving, what are the costs associated and how do you decide what's best? Do you guys have any tips for that?
You know, Krista said something earlier when I think she was talking about alfalfa production, and really taking a good hard look at, you know, what you already have and what you might need, and really get some good information on the costs of those things. So there are a lot of benefits to having a horse at home, but there are a lot of costs associated with that too. You know, so I think that in the short run, the startup costs obviously are going to be higher to keep your horse at home as you acquire everything you need and put up the fencing you need and build the stalls you need. It depends on what's already there. You know, in the long run, I think it's less expensive, but you're not, think about the opportunity cost of your time. So economists like to talk about opportunity cost. When you have your own farm, you're the one that's responsible for mowing and weed eating and maintaining fencing and arenas if you have one. You know, I boarded for a few years here in Kentucky, and I'm now at home, and I wouldn't change the decision, but one of the a number of things that I've realized, arenas are really difficult. They take a lot of time and they're expensive. And as a person that is a hobby rider, it doesn't make sense to invest a lot of money in an arena, but you do need a safe place to ride. And so, you know, I have a little bit of an area where I can ride, but it's not like where I would be if I was at a boarding facility. You know, and then time that you would be going to the boarding facility to ride your horse, you are now having to mow and go fix all the things that your young horse broke this week and that sort of thing. So those are all good things to think about when you're deciding whether to keep them at home. For me, it's priceless to have them in my backyard and to see them every day. And I'm thankful that we can make it work, but it's not right for everybody.
Yeah, can I actually jump in on that question too?
Yeah, sure.
Not from a pasture standpoint, but just as a fellow horseman. I'm in the same position. I boarded for a number of years before we bought a farm of our own, and I now keep my horses here. And something that I did not consider when we made this switch was how much I enjoyed having that the social aspect of a boarding barn. So I know boarding barns can be they can be dramatic, they can be stressful, but you can also have really great friendships at a boarding facility. And I think when I first left there, I was really sad. Like, I genuinely grieved because I missed having a reason to hang out with my friends, and I realized that was the thing that we had in common. So like Jill, I wouldn't change the decision, but that was something that struck me really hard, and that I really just missed my friends and missed having people to ride with. So that makes a big difference. So just kind of keep that in mind too.
That's a really good point. My barn family means the world to me, and we've had several people in the past year or so go buy their own farms. And when they've left, it's just been like a mourning period. We miss them so much, and it's really a lovely time when we can get back together. I have a few follow-up questions for you guys, and one of them is from Kate. Actually, Kate has two questions, and she'd like to know, how do you add the nitrogen? And then the other question is, how many hours of grazing will equal 1 bale of hay for a horse?
Oof. I'll start with the easy one with the nitrogen. So most of our nitrogen fertilizer is in a pellet form. And so you have a couple different options. If you have like a cone spreader, it looks kind of like a V shape, and it's got a little swirly thing at the bottom, hooks on the back of a tractor, or even they make small ones that can go on the back of an ATV. I've even seen them on golf carts. Those work pretty well. If you're a really small farm, you know, you got a ½ acre or so, and you've got a couple of kids, there's nothing that says you can't just take a bucket and a scoop and just kind of walk through like this. I've done that before, actually. So that works pretty well. And then if you live close to, there's some farm supply stores that'll actually rent out a fertilizer hopper for you. And so you just hook it to your truck, drive it to the farm, spread it, and then take it back. That's pretty easy if you happen to have one of those nearby. I know in some areas they put out liquid nitrogen fertilizer. It's not like pure nitrogen, obviously, but it's somehow like suspended or something. And I'm not really sure, but you'd have to have a specialized truck to do that, I would think. So probably the granular would be the easiest with one of those cone seeders, I would think. And the second question was how many hours of grazing equals a bale of hay? That's going to depend on a lot of things. I know I have a horse that's like a vacuum cleaner, and I'm pretty sure she could eat that in 20 minutes. But I know that our nutritionist at UK, Dr. Lori Lawrence, she says that if we want to restrict a horse, restrict the amount of grazing that they have, so the amount of fresh forage that they're getting, that we have to be below 8 hours. So she says that a horse can get their entire daily forage intake on pasture in 8 hours if they want to. So when we're looking at diets for horses, we often assume, well, if they're in the stall for 12 hours and they're on the pasture for 12 hours, then we assume that they're getting 50-50. But horses are smart, and they know that that's the routine, and they can actually do a lot more grazing out in the field if they want to. So like my horse has a muzzle on, and so I used to take it off for the day and then just put it on at night. And she can certainly get her full day's ration in that 8 hours. So I don't know that I could tell you like hours per bale of hay, but I can tell you that they can get their whole diet in 8 hours or less, or about 8 hours. So if you want to restrict pasture more than that, you got to be less than 8 hours. So Jill, do you have any thoughts?
I also, well, I did a little back of the napkin calculation.
Oh,
And if we have a 1,200 pound horse that's eating, between 1.5 and 2.5% of its body weight per day in forage, that would be between 18 and 25 pounds. And so if you have a 50-pound bale of hay, then if the horse is eating 25 pounds of forage a day, that is a bale of hay every 2 days. And so, if I've got my horse out on pasture and I'm not throwing them any hay, I think that every other day I'm saving a bale of hay. If they're sort of on the lower end of that, where they are eating 1.5% of their body weight, maybe I'm saving a bale of hay only every 3 days. So that's not exactly the answer to the question, but sort of an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, and then we have and we're getting close to, let's take one last question. Hey, this is from Tally in our live audience. Hay quality and type in my area varies. How hard or stressful on a horse is switching types of grass hays?
Ooh, that would really be a question better suited for a veterinarian or a nutritionist, to be totally honest with you. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable answering that one, to be honest with you.
And
the only comment that I would add to that is I've heard that anytime you're switching feed, you need to do it over a long period of time. So even if it's hay cut from the same field, it's the same type of grass, over a period of 10 to 14 days to slowly mix them in. And so I think Krista's right. It's certainly a vet or a nutritionist is the person to answer that question. But all I know is that all feed changes need to be done very carefully.
Yes, agreed.
And we have some great articles on thehorse.com that can answer that question. So what I'll do is I'll pull some links together to be sent out tomorrow. And then finally, actually, Kate followed up on that last question. At our boarding facility, the horses are fed hay and are out on pasture, but only for a few hours. So I assume that you need more hours to get the value of the pasture and not pay for bales. Is that correct?
I think so, if I'm understanding the question correctly. So they need to spend more time outside if you ultimately want to feed less hay. I think yes and no. For the most part, horses are going to be eating more or less 24/7, right? And so every hour they're in the stall is just more hay that they're probably going to eat. The 8 hours is more like if you're really trying to restrict grazing significantly for like metabolic type horses. But yeah, I think it would make sense that if they're out on the pasture longer, then you're going to end up feeding less hay. But I don't know if an hour here or there is going to make a huge difference, if that's kind of what the question is asking. So.
Okay. Thank you for weighing in on that. All right, we are out of time for questions, and now it is time to for the door prizes. That's kind of exciting, but first, I'm going to go ahead and thank you so much, Krista and Jill. You guys have been excellent tonight. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing that with us. Sorry, the world of Zoom. I feel like I'm constantly interrupting somebody without meaning to. Thank you very much, ladies. Let's see here. Thank you also to our sponsor, Godolphin Lifetime Care.